Tonight on Nation to Nation, Canada has blinked as the RCMP offers to leave Wet'suwet'en traditional territory. But that's just the first step, says this NDP MP.
I think it's critical that the Prime Minister truly stay true to his promise in a nation-to-nation relationship and meet with the Wet'suwet'en chief.
It's all in an effort to end the protests and rail blockades that this Conservative MP says has in part been taken over by thugs.
But the thugs are the anti-energy activists who have no connection to the Wet'suwet'en people, who are causing a number of these disturbances.
Meanwhile, it remains to be seen what all this means for the rail protests near Tyendinaga Mohawk territory.
Ever since they set up the protest here, they've said as soon as the RCMP leave the Wet'suwet'en territory, they'll take down the camp here. So I'd be surprised if they don't, but things may change once they meet with the hereditary chiefs tomorrow.
Hello, I'm Todd Lamoran, and welcome to Nation to Nation. News broke Thursday morning that the RCMP have agreed to leave Wet'suwet'en territory. It was one of the demands made by the hereditary chiefs there. Public Safety Minister Bill Blair then called for land defenders to end blockades that have halted railway traffic. But hereditary chiefs have said they want more than that. They want Coastal GasLink pipeline workers off their traditional territory too. That doesn't seem to be happening yet, so where does that leave us? The protests have shut down CN Rail's main line near Tyendinaga Mohawk territory since February 6th. APTN reporter Annette Francis has been on site for a week now. Thank you for joining us, Annette.
Hi, Todd.
Now, you've heard the news from the RCMP and Bill Blair. Do you think the RCMP leaving the territory will be enough to end the protests there, considering the hereditary chiefs have asked for more than that?
I think that's what they've been saying, the Mohawks here have been saying all along. Ever since they set up the protest here, they've said as soon as the RCMP leave the Wet'suwet'en territory, they'll take down the camp here. So I'd be surprised if they don't, but things may change once they meet with the hereditary chiefs tomorrow.
As you mentioned, they're going to be meeting the hereditary chiefs tomorrow. So what's the atmosphere like right now?
It's quiet. So far, the media has been pretty well shut out. But we have been sitting on the other side of the camp, and there's been people coming and going, but it's been really quiet here.
In fact, you're about as close as you can get. I believe there were cones that were set up. Who set up those blocking the media there?
Yeah, they set them up a few days ago. Last week when I was here, there was media inside the camp. We were free to come and go. And I don't know what happened over the weekend, but since that meeting, they've pretty well shut the media out. So we're no longer able to go in, and they're not answering any of our calls.
Of course, we are speaking to you just after lunch Thursday, so many things could change before we go to broadcast later this evening. Some media coverage caused yourself, as you said, and others to be banned from events. But tell me what it's been like there this past week before this ban.
It's been peaceful. It's been quiet. There's been a lot of support coming in and out. When I was here last week, the camp was pretty full, actually, with people coming and going, people bringing, baked goods, pies, locals coming and staying for the day, just people hanging out and showing support. And things did get a little tense when they read the injunction, and then the OPP said they were going to enforce the injunction. Things were tense. I did stay one night, and it was pretty intense here through the night, but it's settled down and it's back to peaceful and quiet.
Now, the tracks are not physically blocked. I've seen some drone footage of it, and the Mohawks say they never were. So what are they doing there to actually halt railway traffic?
The tracks aren't blocked at all. I've been here since they set up. I was here, they set up on the 6th. I was here on the 7th, and there was never anything on the tracks. They have a snow plow sitting about 2 feet behind the guardrail at the tracks, and it's where any other vehicle would sit for the trains to go by. So there's nothing actually blocking the tracks. They have tents set up along the side, and they have fires going along the side, but nothing is actually blocking the tracks.
Was there any talk that if a train did suddenly come down the line that they would move a vehicle or some other barrier to block it?
They did say, yes, I did at one time hear them say that they would put something that move that plow onto the tracks if any trains go by. But so far it's been quiet.
What do you think this protest has meant to the cause of the hereditary chiefs back in British Columbia?
Oh, I think it's given them international attention. I think Canadians have opened their eyes to what is happening out there. They've gained support. They've also gained, other, maybe not support, but people actually know what's going out there.
Finally, Annette, I know I'm asking you to look into your crystal ball, but what do you think is going to happen tomorrow morning?
Well, they're supposed to, they're going to have a ceremony at 7 a.m. and then they're going to have a meeting at 10. I think once that discussion, which will probably go on most of the day, they're gathering. We'll see. Maybe I wouldn't be surprised if they start tearing down this camp.
Okay, on that, Annette, I want to thank you for speaking to me. Thank you.
Thank you.
After the break, our first political panel of MPs of the season will be here to discuss the crisis. Welcome back. Emergency debates and meetings over solidarity demonstrations across Canada have dominated talk in Ottawa. It's even forced the Prime Minister to cancel an international trip. And to discuss all this is our political panel of MPs. It's the first time we're having them on this season, and it couldn't come at a better time. Everyone, welcome to Nation. Mr. Ananda Sangari, I'm going to start with you. Why should we continue to be patient, as the Prime Minister suggested in the House earlier this week?
Well, first of all, I'm glad to be here with my colleagues. What's important right now is this country is hurting. This country is hurting in many different fronts. We know that there's some disruption with respect to rail and to other services. We also know that 153 years of history is staring us in the eye today. And the challenges that we face as a country is one that requires all of us to dig deeper into our hearts and our souls to understand what we need to do to go forward. The challenges that we face today has been created for a long period of time. What's important is that we move forward in a nation-to-nation relationship that's renewed, that ensures that long-term self-determination is at the core of anything that we move forward with. And I believe the dialogue that our Prime Minister has engaged in, the dialogue that our ministers have been engaged in, and the openness and willingness for us to resolve this in a peaceful manner that ensures that all parties are able to move forward in safety and peace is critical to us, and those are the steps that our government's been taking. And I think it requires patience, of course, but also a willingness for us to listen and to understand the deeper issues.
Mr. Schmill, of course, your leader isn't calling for patience. He's called these people radicals, and your perhaps new leader has even called them thugs. Is this the best approach to be taking?
Well, let's separate who we're talking about here. Obviously, there's the Wet'suwet'en people and the conflicts that they're having internally, and we want to encourage the traditional methods that they have to work out conflicts. We want to encourage that and hope that progresses and they're able to work that out amongst themselves. What I think the potential leader you're talking about and our current leader are talking about. The thugs are the anti-energy activists who have no connection to the Wet'suwet'en people, who are causing a number of these disturbances. There's just an article out today on the CBC, the Wet'suwet'en people telling these protesters to stop hijacking this conversation. Indigenous businesses are going to benefit. The people amongst the nation, as well as the 20 First Nations communities who signed on and approved this project, are going to benefit from this multi-billion-dollar project. And I think that the people are frustrated at the fact that there are these activists with totally different agendas than what the people on the nation are advocating for. And this is where the hijack is. Now, obviously, the situation in Belleville is different than some of the others around the country. But I think that's who we were talking about, not the Wet'suwet'en people who are encouraging this project and want this project to go forward because they see economic prosperity as the way forward.
Ms. Gazan, of course, you've heard, seems like two different approaches to this whole thing. But what can a minority parliament really do about this right now?
Well, I think that, certainly we need to work together. Just going back to my colleague, Gary, some of his comments, when we talk about patience, the Mohawk of Ganassadage have been waiting at the table for 300 years. They've been really patient. And so I think what we're seeing is a culmination of Liberal and Conservative governments who've had over 150 years to deal with long-standing land issues, have failed to do so. And also we know that this is not the first time we've had a crisis. And we know through history, through examples like Ipperwash, Oka, that having police violence or using that tactic will only escalate. I think it's time that we de-escalate this situation. I think it's critical that the Prime Minister truly stay true to his promise in a nation-to-nation relationship and meet with the Wet'suwet'en chiefs. I'm happy to hear that the RCMP are considering standing down. I think that's a good first step. But I think it's critical that the Prime Minister of Canada, not the ministers, they have not asked to meet with the ministers, they've asked to meet with the Prime Minister, that he respects that nation-to-nation and actually shows up. This has gotten way out of hand. And part of it is because it's just kind of been left to escalate. And I feel for workers. I feel for workers that are at the brunt of a failure of governments to deal with long-standing land issues. They're the ones paying the price. Indigenous people continue to pay the price. And it's time that we sit down. We're at a critical juncture. We're at a critical moment. And what we do now counts.
Ms. Gazan, I'm just going to stay with you. If we don't use a law and order approach, I guess, obviously ordinary Canadians are going to get fed up like they did in Edmonton, where counter-protests went in and cleared out that blockade just outside Edmonton.
So that's exactly it. I mean, it's been left so long, it's escalating. And, this is not a time to have these kind of divisive, visceral, divide and conquer tactics that I've had to sit by the Conservatives and listen to. This is a very sensitive time, and we need to be mindful of what we say. We need to be mindful of calling people thugs, name-calling at a time when our country is clearly divided, and we need to find ways to come together. I know the TRC set out 94 calls to action, a path forward. Many of them that have not been put into place, including very disappointing news that the Liberal government is now thinking about stalling, putting in place or putting forward the bill in support of the adoption and implementation of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. It's mentioned 16 times in the TRC as the framework for reconciliation, meaning if you do not provide minimum human rights, fundamental human rights that anybody needs, Indigenous or not, to have joy, we will not reconcile in this country. And it is nice to see Canadians standing together in support of human rights, in support and strong voices dealing with our climate emergency, that is very loud. We see it on our Mother Earth, to say we want a better country. We want a better country that honors human rights and respects our Mother Earth.
If I may pick up on that.
Yes, and I am going to go to that, and I want to actually pick up on a point that Ms. Gazan said. Is the Liberal government going to stall tabling UNDRIP?
Absolutely not. If you look at our commitment during the campaign and in the mandate letter, it's very clear that the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People will be introduced by our government. It'll be co-developed. It will be introduced by the end of the year, but we are working very hard to be able to introduce it earlier. It's a central piece to long-term reconciliation. We fully recognize and we supported, as you recall, we supported this in the 42nd Parliament. It was blocked at the Senate by some conservative
What do you say to those
senators.
reports that you were going to table it this week, but you decided to cancel the timing?
Well, look, the parliamentary calendar, as you know, is something that evolves. As far as I know, the commitment on UNDRIP is to clearly have it tabled, co-developed and tabled by the end of the year, and that is what we're working hard towards. It does. We want to get this through. This is a very important piece of legislation. We want to get it through. We want to get it through both houses, and unlike last time, we don't want to fail. But this is what. I say by working together, this is where I believe the Conservative Party also needs to come to the table. This is a critical moment where, look, there's going to be short-term issues. We're going to face challenges in the short term. But the longer-term piece, if we were to fix this for the future, it needs to be on the basis of human rights in order to ensure that self-determination is at the core of any agreements that we come to, and that is what our department, our minister, is tasked to do, and that's precisely what we want to be working on for this mandate. And I think Canadians expect that of us, and these are moments that remind us that we need to work harder.
Mr. Schmill, I'll give you the last word on what you've heard so far. And it kind of seems like the Conservatives are painted as kind of the bad guys in all this who want to just go in there and start arresting people.
Well, again, what we're talking about are two different things. The NDP and the Liberals like to lump everyone together, and because the NDP agrees with the anti-energy activists that what they're doing is moral and just. What they're doing is breaking the law. The people who have no connection to the Wet'suwet'en people and the benefits that they're going to receive from this project. Again, as I've said, they have their own internal processes, and we encourage that, and we hope for a peaceful outcome to those solutions. It's the people who are blocking and shutting down the economy that are doing illegal actions, and the courts have said so. They are shutting down major parts of the economy. They are causing people to go home to their families and say, I don't have a job anymore, and the bank really doesn't care. They will call in their mortgage, right? So this is hurting real people. And the people that are doing this, like I've said, the people who are not connected have an ulterior motive, which is to shut down Canadian energy development. And that means the benefits that the people on these First Nations communities all along the pipeline will lose that benefit from jobs and economic opportunity. And in terms of UNDRIP, the government, he says, my friend talks about the legislative calendar. Well, they've had 2 opposition days this day. If it was that important to them, they should have tabled it this week. And again, it's just the blame game. Again, the Liberal mentality here, and it goes on for everything else that has failed in the last 5 years, it's always somebody else's fault.
I know I said you were going to get the last word, but I have to, Ms. Gazan, go back to you. And quickly, is this true that the NDP are supporting radicals?
Well, I think, people who stand up for human rights, people who use their freedom of speech to share opinions. I think it's unfortunate that the Conservatives are using, political ploys to label, calling people things like radical activists, thugs. Some of the things that I've had to listen to in the House of Commons, certainly from the Conservative Party, and has been shocking. And I think that we need to be careful about using divisive language at a time when our country clearly is in crisis, and we need to find ways to work together to find a way forward that works for everybody.
Okay, on that point, I have to end it. We certainly could talk more about this, and I'm sure we will in the future. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you,
Thank
Todd.
you. Thank you, Todd.
We'll have more after a short break. Welcome back. The House's Standing Committee on Indigenous Peoples finally got up and running again this week. Members elected a new chair, Bob Bratina. He's a Liberal MP for a Hamilton, Ontario riding. And nothing much else was supposed to happen at this first meeting, until Liberal MP Jaime Batiste, who is Mi'kmaq, made a suggestion.
The TRC calls to action was pretty adamant that we need increased education and training in all areas, and one of them is for us as parliamentarians. So I really feel that we could get off on the right footsteps if we took a historic first for this committee and did something that would increase our knowledge around Indigenous history.
Batiste wanted committee members and staff to participate in a blanket ceremony. That's where people stand on blankets. Other people, the colonizers, kick up the corners of blankets to make them smaller or pull people off a blanket because of Indian Act legislation or death.
And get a sense of being able to move forward on this committee by learning first, by listening first, by understanding first, and then moving forward with priorities and values that we've come to understand from this.
Members began discussing whether or not to do it Thursday, today, or next Tuesday. But then Nunavut's NDP MP, Mumilak Kakak, spoke.
It totally excludes Inuit and Métis groups. And in order for us to have a productive and ongoing discussion, learning doesn't stop there. You don't do the blanket exercise and say, okay, like I've learned my history.
She also believed it would just be a token exercise, and MPs would soon forget any lessons learned. Liberal committee members tried to seek a compromise.
From our side, that this is a good way of starting it off, to hear about the history of the Indigenous people from the Indigenous perspective. So we thought this was a good way of starting the process. I don't think we intended to alienate Inuit people by doing it this way, but couldn't we have some compromise that, okay, yeah, we can do this, and then you can do something later?
The whole point of this can move forward in the spirit of reconciliation if we first start off by listening and opening our hearts, opening our minds in a good way. And that was the intention of this, and I think it would be historic for this committee to take this on.
What my point is we all need to make a commitment to be invested in learning. So in saying that, I don't think it's a good way to start off an exercise that focuses on First Nations groups and excludes Inuit and Métis. So I don't agree with doing the exercise.
Batiste had wanted consensus to do the blanket exercise, so had to shelve the idea.
Perhaps we'll have a conversation some other time where we can come back to the committee with some kind of consensus on an appropriate mechanism that would take into consideration all Aboriginal peoples in Canada, Inuit, Métis, and First Nation in this. And so with that, I withdraw.
And that's Nation to Nation for this week. If you missed any part of tonight's show or a past episode, check out our podcasts. Go to aptnnews.ca/podcast. I'm Todd Lamoran. Thanks for watching.